I think Apollo 8, the crew there on Christmas Eve when they had the TV show and they read from Genesis.
Right.
Except, in my opinion, except for Neil Armstrong's words, that was the most powerful word spoken from the moon. Now that I'm a believer, man, it's so true.
Yeah.
So the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of His hands. And I see that now in every part of creation. And so it's been a wonderful walk, and I tell everybody walking on the moon was fantastic, but it only lasted 3 days. And the walk with Jesus is even better, and it lasts forever.
Hello, welcome to Creation.Live. In each episode of this show, ICR scientists gather with subject matter experts, apologists, and other special guests to discuss pressing issues, whether that be ICR's current research, something new that's come to light in the scientific community, or something else entirely that impacts how science ultimately points to our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ. We hope these conversations are encouraging and enlightening in an increasingly chaotic world. I'm your host, Michael, and with me today, I have ICR physicist, Dr. Jake Hebert. Thanks for being here today. And then our special guests, Apollo 16 astronaut General Charlie Duke and his wife, Dotty. Thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Well, today, we are discussing the fascinating lives of a moonwalking astronaut, his wife, and how the Lord Jesus rescued them from divorce and suicide and ultimately led you to evangelistic ministry. So I'm excited to jump right in. If you've watched our show before, our viewers and listeners, we've had another astronaut on before, Colonel Jeff Williams, who talked about his time on the International Space Station. But today, and that was episode 5, so we'll include that in the show notes in our description below. But now we get to talk to an Apollo 16 astronaut, and you walked on the moon. I mean, not many people can say that. I'm right next to you. This is great. Do you have any dust with you? No, that's probably illegal. But I want to learn more about you. Both of you, actually. That's why we have both of you on the show, because it's not just the story of one man. It's a couple, a man and wife.
Yeah.
Tell us more about you and your story.
Well, let me say how I got started. I grew up in Lancaster, South Carolina, in a small town, and my dad was in the Navy during World War II. And after war was over, we moved back to South Carolina, and I grew up in Lancaster, and I decided I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and be a naval officer like my dad. So I went off to prep school, Admiral Farragut Academy down in St. Petersburg, Florida, so I could get the education and pass the exams to get into the Naval Academy. Went to the Naval Academy, fell in love with airplanes, and back then there wasn't an Air Force Academy, so you could volunteer for going to Air Force. So I as I said, fell in love with airplanes, so I decided to go Air Force. And as I went into the Air Force, this was in the summer of 1957. And I was in flight school in Moultrie, Georgia, in October of 1957 when Sputnik went up. And that was the beginning of the space race, space age. And so I ended up graduating from there and then on to Webb Air Force Base in Big Spring, Texas, and then from there back to Moody. And then in 1959, the spring of 59, I was assigned to Ramstein Air Base. And so I went to Ramstein. And during that year, the first astronauts were selected. NASA was chartered a little bit before that. And the space race was on, if you will. And so I get over there, and in 1961, I was really enjoying my job. It was a great flying job. And then the big news hit. Yuri Gagarin has launched into space April 1961, followed in early May by Alan Shepard. Then a couple of weeks later, Kennedy announced we're going to go to the moon. And everybody laughed,
Yes.
hoo-ha,
Unheard of.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. But looking back now, the most amazing thing was 8 years and 2 months later, I'm sitting in Mission Control talking to Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin when they landed on the moon. Well, in the summer of '62, I made a decision at the Air Force request to go back to MIT and graduate school. And while I was there, I was working on the Apollo guidance and navigation system, and met some astronauts, and they'd come up to look at this system, and I'd never met anybody that was so enthusiastic about their job. So I said, how did I get that job? And said, well, you get your degree, go to test pilot school, and you might have a chance. So I followed their advice. Dottie and I got married that next year in 1963. We had met in Boston and got married. She's from Atlanta, and we got married and down in Atlanta. But anyway, we started out test pilot school, and I started in June of 1960, summer '64. Graduated the next year and went on staff at test pilot school. And that was in July of '65. And in September, I read an article in the Los Angeles paper said that NASA's picking more astronauts.
Astronauts wanted.
Yeah, right
exactly.
Now
That's what I said. I answered a want ad in paper. And so...
you qualified.
Well, I was qualified, but there were a lot of people qualified. Mm-hmm. And so I applied. Went to my boss, who was Colonel Chuck Yeager, and he was the commandant. I said, "Sir, what do I do?" He said, "I was working for him," and he said, "Well, I don't know, but we'll find out." And anyway, through a process of elimination and physicals, in April of 1966, it was announced that 19 of us were picked, and off we went to Houston and stayed there 10 years. And so that's the background up until I left NASA in 1976. I only flew once, but I worked on 5 of the nine missions that went to the moon, and was support crew on Apollo 10, and then mission control at Capcom when they took the lunar module to the moon, but it wasn't scheduled to land. That was in May of 1969. 2 months later, I'm in mission control when Neil Armstrong and Buzz landed, Apollo 11. Then I was backup crew on Apollo 13, helped get them back after the explosion in the spacecraft. Then I walked on the moon on Apollo 16 and then finished up on Apollo 17 backup. So I had a lot of experience in Apollo, but only one flight. There were 27 seats to the moon, 9 missions, but only 24 people went. 3 guys went twice, but nobody walked on the moon except for once. So there were 12 of us walked on the moon, and now there's only 4 of us left alive. And I'm the youngest, and Jack Schmidt is next. We're both in our 80s, late 80s, and everybody else is in 90 above. So
you're still the youngest man to walk on the moon? Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I'm physically qualified, actually, still, but I tell everybody, don't. NASA, I said, I'm ready to go. NASA said, don't call us, we'll call you.
How do you feel about that, Dottie? It's like the
I don't think
reserves, you
they'll
get
call.
called back.
If they do call,
we'll
sit down and pray about that one.
That's right. Yeah. Love it. Well, quite the resume you have, and obviously that's not the end of your story because it goes beyond Apollo. But it's funny, not funny, but interesting to know your work on that, even at MIT, right? Like that, how the Lord was preparing you all along the way. I have your book right here, Moonwalker, and I've been reading it too, just to see how even not a failed test, but like, was it astigmatism in one eye or something? How that kind of changed the course of your career, really, that nothing's an accident and nothing's a mistake. No. God has a plan with even the smallest detail.
Yeah, since we became believers, God spoke to our hearts and through others, and I've guided your every step. And so I look back, thank you, Lord, for guiding me into the space program and giving me a platform to share Jesus with people all over the world, presidents, prime ministers, kings. I've spoken to kings and dictators, and everybody wants to know what it was like on the moon. So
it's like the book of Proverbs saying that, like that's it's coming to life, right?
Like, if you see a man who excels in his work, he shall not stand before mean men. He will serve before kings.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
And the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And
Exactly.
clearly did, including on the moon. Well, Dottie, I wanted to hear some of your story as well. On your website, we'll get into this later at the very end, probably about your ministry, but we have, the Moonwalker book, and we also have a booklet or a little pamphlet you wrote, From Sadness to
Yes.
Joy, and I read through that the other day, and it was just really encouraging to see your perspective, because I think many people often think, I want to hear from the astronaut, but what about the astronaut's wife? And tell us your side of the story.
Well, I'd have to go back really to when we got married, I guess, wouldn't I?
That's fair, yeah.
And so I was looking for someone like Cinderella did, for Prince Charming, and we were going to live happily ever after. And so even when he proposed to me, I said to him, I'm going to put you first in my life. Will you put me first in your life? Because I knew that was what I was looking for. And he said, yes. So we got married, and it didn't take long to realize that I wasn't. He was, of course, busy with his studies at MIT, and he had to do that. But just, I could tell, that I was not really, he had gotten married, checked that off. So now you could get on with the rest of the story of his story. And, but I worked the next few years just trying everything I knew how to get him to love me the way I wanted to be loved. And it was very needy, and I'd cry, or I'd do romantic things, all that kind of stuff. Then when he was selected to be an astronaut, I decided, well, I'll put things on hold as far as our relationship. And then when he gets back from the moon or wherever he goes to go, I was really excited. He got chosen to go to the moon. People asked me about that. And I said, well, gosh, we were there for him to fly, and I wouldn't want him to sit on the bench. He's there to fly, and to get to fly on that flight to the moon. And they had been successful. Even Apollo 13, as you were saying, to me was a very successful flight, showing what NASA could do, bring someone back from that situation.
Exactly.
So I was excited about that. But when he came back from the moon, it didn't take long to realize. I mean, there was golf, there was flying, there was all these other things, and I was way down, the children even. And so I thought about divorce. And something spoke to me, and I know now it was the Lord, because I had decided when I was in college that, how do you know if there really is a God? Maybe he really isn't there. Maybe there's not a God, and Jesus isn't the Son of God. So I thought divorce, but then this thought came, well, maybe there's not a man out there that can love me the way I want to be loved. So I thought, well, okay, if that's not the answer to life, then what is the answer to life? And began this long search. I look at Ecclesiastes and kind of see it there, of trying to find the answer to life. And all the things I tried, jobs, volunteer work, all those different things, didn't bring me the love I was seeking. And so I thought, well, maybe there's no answer to life. I'm lonely, I'm sad, I I'm not happy, and I'm going to die sometime anyway, so I think I'll just go ahead and kill myself and put it to an end. It was like that. I just really want to get off this planet. It's mean, it's ugly. And again, the timing of the Lord is always perfect, and that's when our church had a renewal weekend, and for the first time in my life, I heard somebody not preach, but tell you they knew God, and Jesus was the Son of God, and he is the answer for the world, and he helped them and all that. And I thought, well, okay, well, I haven't tried that one. So I prayed simply, just, Lord, if you're real, I don't know if you're real or not. Jesus, I don't know if you're real or not, but I made a mess of my life. That was one thing I knew. And so if you're real, then I give you my life. And I really felt like I was opening a closet door, looking in, and I was going to jump in there, and if God was there, he'd catch me. And if he wasn't there, then I'd land and I'd kill myself. And it was really a leap of faith. And the next day, the only way I knew how to find out if he was real is to talk to him and pray to him. And he had answered them, and if he did that with them, then he would do it with me if he was God. So I started doing that, and there was a lot of things I call luck and I call coincidence. And after a while, I just figured, you really don't have that much luck and that much coincidence. Right. And it was just mind-boggling to me, thinking, wow, that I have somebody who loves me. He loves me.
Perfectly.
Perfectly, yes. He's the answer. And I even told Charlie, he didn't understand at all. But I knew that I had found what I was looking for, and it was okay. And then the Lord showed me later that what I had done and what I had said, putting Charlie first in my life, whatever's first in your life is your God. So I knew then that, I made him my God and expected things from him that he couldn't do. As a human, he couldn't do, but God could do. And so I had that learning and growing and continued learning and growing now with the Lord. It's very, very exciting to walk with him. I think it's an adventure. It's really an exciting adventure. You don't know from day to day what God's going to tell you or have you do. And it's just thrilling to me to know you, Lord, and to be able to share you with others. And that's why I like evangelism and want to share my faith, because that's how I came to the Lord, having someone share, a number of people share their faith. And so it's great now.
She's good at it.
Yeah, apparently, I can tell.
Takes every advantage, every opportunity, I should say.
Yeah. Lord, he has an open door. It's amazing how it happens.
That's right.
Our airplanes we travel a lot. And so we just had some exciting trips already this year of opportunities to share that we didn't realize were coming.
Well, reading your testimony, it seems like you were going to church, but you weren't convinced that God is real or that Jesus is real. And I wonder if there's a lot of people out there in that situation.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Because when I went back to church, after I realized that God was real, I looked around, nobody looks happy. This is a happy, joyful thing.
That's right.
And they didn't look that way. And I started realizing the church even itself is an evangelistic place.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people, even pastors, who really don't know the Lord and had that personal relationship with him. And head knowledge is fine, but not knowing him personally and knowing he's with you and lives in you and you can talk to him all the time, right?
Yes,
Jesus,
that's right.
we can talk to you all the time.
That's right.
And he's there and these nudges that he gives and thoughts he gives, it's just exciting. It really is.
And I remember from your story, too, seeing how you were even teaching Sunday school. I think, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Before you were technically saved.
I was very involved with Sunday school.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. Just because for people who are listening, watching, just because you grew up in church or I've always been a Christian, examine your heart and think about it. Who really is the Lord of your life? Where are you placing your faith? Who are you putting first in your life? Is it your husband? Is it could be your children? Could be volunteer efforts. So think through.
Yeah,
first in your life is
just in my own personal witnessing, I try not to assume that people really believe that Jesus is who he said he was. Because I've witnessed to people who've grown up in church, and I've asked them point blank, not to put them on the spot, but just to find out where they're coming from. Are you 100% certain that Jesus Christ is who he claims to be? And I've talked to Baptists, Methodists, Catholics, and they say no. And it's like, okay, well, yeah.
Well, she comes from a very religious family.
Yep.
Her grandfather was an Episcopal priest. Her uncle was the Bishop of Atlanta and married us in the cathedral. And so we had a lot of church. I was baptized as a 11-year-old in the First Baptist Church in Lancaster, South Carolina. And I knew a lot about God, but I didn't know God.
There was even a Life magazine that came out and said, God is dead. This was back in the 1970s. It's 1970s. God is dead, and he's dead because we've become so smart and so sophisticated, we don't need him anymore. He was just a crutch all these years, so he's not real. So you read that and you think, well, I don't know. I mean, how can you know if he's real if you haven't met him and talked to him? Yeah. Just reading about him he's there, just ready for you.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yes, is there anybody here that doesn't know this Jesus that talks to you and is with you and lives in you? I pray that you will receive him today, because there's nothing better than to know him and the excitement he brings to your life, the healing he brings. I was so full of unforgiveness towards Charlie because he had hurt me for those 12 years that we were married before I came to know Jesus. And that was one of the first things he said. He said, if you want a born-again marriage, because I recognized then I was really born again, starting this brand new life. So exciting. And if you want a born-again marriage, you've got to forgive him like I've forgiven you. And I understood, having been in church, God's forgiveness is complete. He does forgive. And I argued with him because I didn't want to. He had never said he was sorry or anything. And I thought he should suffer a while. I've been suffering a long time, God. And then he reminded me of the verse in the Bible, which is, I think, so important for parents to take their children to church, because you will learn, and the Holy Spirit helps remind you of those things. Of you call him Lord, but you don't do the will of the Father in heaven. You can't call him Lord if you don't do the will of him. And so God reminded me of that. Said, you can't call me Lord and not forgive him. And so he helped me. And that's the greatest thing about the Lord too, is he doesn't just tell you what to do. He helps you do it. He gives you this power of spirit to be able to forgive like that. And so really, I think it was a fairly short time, 2 months, really, with the devil talking on one side, there he goes again, and Jesus saying, remember, it's gone. We forgave him. It's not there anymore. That was wonderful. And then to realize suddenly that, wow, I don't feel that horrible gut feeling of pain. It was gone, just gone. And then he had to teach me how to love him.
That's right.
Like he loves us unconditionally. And folks, he can do that.
That's right.
He can do that. You can love like Jesus loves. We aren't perfect, but we can.
Well, so taking us back to timeline, we're talking about you being saved, but you were before that is when you were working for NASA. Is that correct? So what was it like? Because I'm never going to experience this as much as I know. That what's it like to work for NASA?
Well, it was a very exciting job. There were 40-something of us astronauts, and I got there in the middle of Gemini program, and Tom Stafford and had flown with Wally Schirra, first rendezvous flight. You didn't really have a flight assignment at first, and you were just hoping you'd get something. But they taught us geology. If you're going to go to the moon, you ought to know what kind of rocks to pick up. So it was mostly that, and then you were doing work for various parts that of the space program that NASA wanted you to work on. We had 8 people killed over a 3-year period, 4 in airplane accidents, 3 in the fire at Kennedy, Apollo 1, and 1 automobile accident. John Glenn left and retired, and then all of the first 7, not all of them left, but several of them retired. And so we began to bubble up, and I was monitoring propulsion systems. And then I got support crew for Apollo 10, which Tom Stafford was the commander, and John Young was the lunar module pilot, command module pilot, and Gene Cernan was the lunar module pilot. And this was the first flight we were going to take the lunar module to the moon. Only the second flight the lunar module had flown. And their spacecraft wasn't qualified to land, so they weren't planning on landing, but it was a dry rehearsal, a dress rehearsal, I should say, of this check out, descend, abort, come back into orbit, and rendezvous. So it was everything but the landing. It was a very exciting mission. And so that got me into got me to Capcom, the capsule communicator. So doing all of this lunar module stuff in lunar orbit, I was the Capcom talking to the crew during these maneuvers. And everything went so well, then Neil Armstrong was to be the commander of Apollo 11, and that was going to be the first landing attempt. So he said, well, Charlie, I'd like you to do the same thing for us as you did on Apollo 10 and be in mission control when we attempt to land. Man, a great honor for me. I said, yes, sir, I'd be happy to do that. And so I went over, the whole crew from Apollo 10 went to Apollo 11 in mission control and to do the same thing as we already did except for the landing. And we had 2 months to train and with the crew, and we got really good at it. And it was very exciting to know that you got now a month to go and we're going to launch this thing and man, we're going to land on the moon. And so it was very dynamic and very exciting in mission control. And you get to talk to the crew and have interface with them and ask them questions. They'd ask you questions about procedures and stuff. And so when we launched, everything went well until we started our descent. And then it seemed like the wheels came off the descent, during the descent. First off, we had a communication problem. The mission rule says if you don't get communication back in 30 seconds, they're supposed to abort. Well, we kept getting communication back. And then the computer overloaded. And that I thought we were dead in the water with an overloaded computer, but the flight controller that monitored the computer knew we were go. So we continued, and then at 7,000 feet, Neil pitches over and he sees the landing spot for the first time, and we had him targeted into the wrong place. So he couldn't land. So he levels off and flies several miles or more level, about 500 feet altitude, till he found a place that was suitable to land. Well, that used up all the reserve fuel. So now we're minimum fuel. And he starts down, and the first call to identify minimum fuel was Eagle 60 seconds. And the flight controller said, flight 60 seconds. And I radioed Eagle 60 seconds. And then the next one was Eagle 30 seconds. And I called Eagle 30 seconds. And they weren't on the ground, but they were close, 20 feet or so. And about 13 seconds later, I heard Buzz Aldrin say, contact, engine stop. And they were on the moon. And what a great sigh of relief in mission control. Yes. Whew, we made it. It was like puncturing a big balloon, and the air just escaped, and the tension disappeared, and everybody's smiling like crazy. And Gene Kranz, the flight director, got everybody back to reality, though. I said, we got to make sure this thing is safe, and so we did. And then Neil Armstrong, about 3 or 4 seconds after landing, said he told me he was going to change his call sign from Eagle to Tranquility Base. And there was only me and the 3 crew guys knew that was going to. So he said, Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. Well, I'm so excited I couldn't even pronounce tranquility. It came out twang.
Twang.
Yeah, but I corrected myself, and it was terrific. And so we had a successful landing. And then I was a backup crew for Apollo 13. And then Apollo was so successful, but we didn't have it. You were restricted because up through Apollo 14, you had to walk everywhere. And it's really hard walking, even though you're lightweight in your suit. In lunar gravity, it was still more like a Frankenstein walk, So they said, well, we need a car. Well, if we need a car, we need a heavier lunar module. It can stay 3 days instead of 1 day. And so we started working on the rover. And we were supposed to be the Apollo 16, supposed to be the first flight of the rover, but they canceled. Apollo was so successful, they canceled the last 3 missions and brought the rover up to 15. So 15, 16, 17 were the 3 with the rover. So we actually ended up second with the rover. And all of that took a couple of years to get ready to, so we had to stretch out a schedule. But so we trained but we kept training. And then we picked up the training with the rover and all the experiments packages. And so John and I were ready to go. I mean, I know how to do this. Let's launch.
Yeah. John Young, right?
Yeah.
He was on which previous Apollo?
He was on Apollo 10 as a command module pilot. Yeah. And so Cernan and Stafford were the crew on a lunar module.
Looking at the size of that rover, it's amazing that you could fit it on there. I mean, it's like...
Well, it was ingenious design, Jeff, exactly, because the spot they were going to put it on the outside, as you got outside, it was on the right side of the ladder. And it was 5 feet by 5 feet. Well, the rover's 5 feet, but 10 feet long. So they hinged the chassis and made 2 hinges. The front wheels came in like airplane, and it folded over onto the front side of the center chassis, and the back end did the same, and it folded over. So now you got a 5 foot by 5 foot vehicle. They just bolted it to the outside of the vehicle. And so when we of course practiced deploying it, and we had a set of cables, and I was pulling on one side and John was pulling on the other. And we just jacked it out like this, and when it got out 45 degrees, all the pins pulled and it just flopped open, like lowering your landing gear in an airplane. And so it was there. And so we got it on the ground, and it was pointed underneath the spacecraft. And John, we just picked it up and walked it off. And the car weighed 80 pounds up there. So you felt like Superman,
Right.
Hey, I'm carrying my car, buddy. How about that? And so the rover was revolutionized lunar exploration for 15, 16, and 17. And we drove a total of about 17 miles. And farthest we got away was about 4 miles, I guess. 17 got away about 7 miles. So we got a lot of confidence in the car. So we extended the range with this confidence, because we felt like, well, if the car breaks down and we're 4 miles away, we can walk back. And we'd practice that. And so we proved that we could. So that was our limit, 4 miles, and it was 7 miles on the last mission. So the last 3 missions of Apollo were thrilling. They were scientifically amazing. We landed in the lunar highlands, and it was different rocks than on the Maury. Our altitude difference between where Apollo 11 landed and we landed was like 8,000 feet. And the scientists, geologists, had said we were going to find 2 types of volcanic rock up there. Well, there wasn't any. And we started describing these rocks. It was fine-grained rock. And the science group said, we wasted 6 years of training on these dummies. And but then they got excited because what we were finding was totally different than the Maury rock. And so we collected 200 and something pounds of lunar rock and soil samples. And we didn't want to come back. We were having so much fun. And we had 21 hours outside. The longest was almost 8 hours. And the last EVA they cut us short. So it's a little over 5 hours. And so it was a thrilling. I never lost my enthusiasm, never lost my excitement, wonder, awe. I'm on the moon. I'm on the moon. You just. It's hard to believe, really.
Yeah.
And so, and we felt right at home because you recognize the major landing marks, a landing site, and you look forward. And it's very clear since there's no atmosphere and a sharp break between the horizon and the blackness of space. And you just look up, and the Earth was right overhead, so we couldn't see the Earth. When you look up in Apollo, you're looking at the top of your helmet. So, but it was right overhead, and it stayed there. And sun got higher and higher and higher, and the surface got hotter and hotter, but that didn't bother us. Your suit kept you cool inside. And so we just went to work, and John was driving, and I was navigating. And when we were underway, there was no TV. The antenna was, rocking like this. The moon was a rough ride, but you never felt like it was going to turn over on you. But it was just like ice driving and a lot. And so John drove, and I navigated us and took pictures. And so it was only one scary time in the whole flight, and that was right at the end. We were going to do the Moon Olympics, and so the high jump record. Well, down here I weighed 360 pounds with all of my gear on. Up there, 60 pounds. So I started bouncing and jumped, and when I did, I straightened up, and the CG, center of gravity, went backwards, and over I went like that. And it was scary. But fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. And so I'm in trouble. I just thought, roll right. And so I rolled right and broke my fall on my back, on my right side, bounced onto my back, and my heart was pounding, but I'm still alive, and everything seems normal. You can hear the pumps running, and John Young comes running over and looks down and says, "That wasn't very smart, Charlie."
Good.
Help me up, John. So he helped me up, and the TV camera had been pointed right at me when I went over backwards. So mission control said, "That ends the Moon Olympics, guys. No more Olympics."
Right. Oh, man.
So we got back and said, Dottie saw all this.
Yeah,
She
it
was
was
in
mission control when it happened. Yeah, they were not happy.
No. Like, don't
That's why
ever
they wanted
do
to
that
get right back.
again.
Yeah, no, you come home right now.
Yeah.
Right.
So we had another sweet thing that I got to do was drop a picture of my family on the moon. And
So you are on the moon, Dottie.
Yeah.
didn't last
whole
very long.
family.
The temperature was like 200 and something degrees on the surface at that point. So, a little photograph's not going to last very long on a hot surface
true.
like that. So,
And our two sons who were 5 and 7, they're all in the picture. It was nice.
Emblazoned them.
so we wanted we had so much fun that John and I volunteered for backup on Apollo 17. They needed a backup crew. And John said, "Well, it's a dead-end job." But I talked him into it. "John, suppose they break their leg, we get to go again." So he said, "Hey, that's a good idea." So we started training.
Yeah.
But they stayed healthy, and Apollo was over.
Nice. So take us. I know I'm going a little bit backwards here, but take us with you when you like even just before launch. What's going on through your mind, and what was it like on your way out to get a glimpse of Earth?
Yeah.
Outside of Earth.
Yeah. First off, you land there on your back, and the only thought that I could say that was continuous: keep counting, because you only had a 4-hour window to lift off, and if you didn't make it in that 4-hour window, you had to wait 30 days till the moon came around again. And in that 30 days, we're going to cancel the program, or you're going to have an automobile accident, or you get sick. So anything can happen, and you lose your chance. So everybody in the spacecraft, we were sort of quiet, but it was your thoughts were keep counting. And sure enough, right on the second, the launch window opened, and we lifted off. And it was the Saturn was huge, it was 360 feet tall. We were up on the top, the big 5 engines down here, they're moving to control the trajectory, and all that vibration hits the spacecraft, and you're side to side, and can't see outside now. The windows are covered over, so you're just looking at your instrument panel, and this thing's it's not like a pogo like this, it was just sideways, and you were shaking in your seats, and I didn't remember anybody telling me it was going to shake, but John was very calm. He'd flown it before on Apollo 10, and he said, "We'll go," and Houston said, "You go." And so we just shook for 2 minutes and 40 seconds of first stage. Then we shut down, and it still couldn't see outside because the launch escape system wouldn't jettison until 3 minutes and 15 seconds. So we separated. And then the second stage ignited, and shortly after that, the launch escape system was jettisoned, and the windows are now uncovered. And I looked at I looked out there, and I could see the Pacific, but I couldn't see any land. We were over the Pacific. So we left Earth orbit shortly thereafter and separated from the third stage, and Mattingly, as he was pitching the spacecraft over to retrieve the lunar module from its launch position, 16,000 miles away, the Earth floats into view in my window. It's breathtaking. And there's the Arctic Circle down across Canada, the U.S., Mexico, Central America. You could see clearly the coast of Southern California and Baja Peninsula, and you could see the Southwest United States, the Rockies. Couldn't see any evidence of civilization, but you could see the major features. And there it was just hung in the blackness of space. And the three colors that I remember so vivid, the blackness of space, but on the earth there was the white of the snow and the clouds, the brown of the land, and the crystal blue of the oceans. And there's it, jewel just suspended in the blackness of space. Later on, 4 years later, 5 years later, 6 years later, when I became a believer, somewhere it is written that when God made the earth, he suspended it upon nothing. Yeah. And that's exactly what it looks like. And so to this day, that's one of the most memorable pictures in my mind. So we got busy, got to lunar module, and on we went to the moon, and we did some exercises and experiments, I should say, and all. But it was just waiting 3 days to get to the moon in Apollo. And we got to the moon, and we orbited and for a day and separated, powered up the lunar module, and 1 hour before we were to land on the backside of the moon, out of contact with Earth, Mattingly had to light the main engine and change his orbit. So that if we aborted on the next hour during our landing attempt, he would be in the right position for us to rendezvous. So he said, "There's something wrong with this engine." And "What's wrong with it, Ken?" And he said, "It's shaking us apart when I try to check out the control systems." And John said, "Don't burn." When John said that, we weren't going to land the next hour. So we came around, I mean, if your heart can sink in zero gravity, it sunk to the bottom of my boots. And, 2 years of training, 8 miles to go, and then, come home. And anyway, we came around the front, Mission Control said, "Get back together, you guys, and don't dock, but get back together and we'll check it out." Well, we disappeared behind the back, came back again around the front side. Now we're 4 hours late, and Mission Control said, "Well, we figured out what the problem is. We can't fix it, but here's a workaround. So you go for your burn on the next rev." And Apollo 11, you're cleared to land on the next rev. I didn't say hallelujah, but now I would, because so we landed. And it was the last rev that we could land because the moon was slowly rotating out from under our orbit. And we had enough cross range to reach back to the landing on that rev, but the next one we couldn't. So it was that close. But we landed, no problem. After that, spacecrafts all worked great. So,
General Duke, you said Apollo 11 was or did you mean 16?
Yeah, you meant 16.
The one you
did
were
I
on?
say Apollo 11?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Say something
okay.
too.
All right.
I'm sorry. I worked on so many, I lose track.
That's right. Even on part of
Apollo 16.
Yeah.
We were the fifth landing. Apollo
What
11
are the
was,
chances, though, that with that being your last rev, speaking of numbers and mathematics and physics and all the stuff that's beyond and over my head, really, what were the chances apart from the Lord's will that was going to happen? You would have had to abort. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And come home.
What a letdown.
And what you can imagine, the disappointment. And so...
that was the only thing I worried about on the flight. After Apollo 13 and them not being able to land, that was my big worry. Something might happen, he couldn't land. Yeah. Not death or anything like that, but just he would come home disappointed, like they really were very disappointed.
Yes. Yeah.
So we got a landing, and then after that, everything went really well. The lunar surface, we didn't have any problems, except me falling down at the end. But we collected a lot of rocks, and the geologists were very excited. Our experiments package all worked well, and all of the experiments that we left up there and the ones we brought back were unique, if you will, and they were very pleased. And so Apollo, that's why they canceled the last 3 missions. Apollo was so successful scientifically, and I think they wanted to spend the money on space shuttle, and also the political climate was changing. If we kill somebody on 18, 19, and 20, they might cancel the whole program. So,
what were the implications of the scientific experiments, other than you mentioned rocks? But
well, we had 2 seismic experiments. We had a heat flow experiment. We had a magnetic magnetometer that we left permanent, and also a traveling one that was on the back of the rover. We had a core that would one I could drill down with this drill 10 feet, and then we could jack it back up. And so we had samples from surface to 10 feet down. And so it was Apollo was really scientifically, and we were looking for special samples of shadowed rock, for instance, and that permanently shadowed. Let me put it that way. And we found a place, and so we had a camera that John deployed. It was made by the Naval Observatory. It took whatever the wavelength was when you can see the solar wind and all out there. I don't remember what it was now, but anyway, that was there, and we brought all that film back. Mattingly had 2 big film canisters, and he was mapping the moon and all of that stuff over, at least right under our orbit. So, as I said, 15, 16, and 17 really revolutionized lunar exploration with the car and all of the experiments that worked great. And so it was a scientific gold mine.
sounds like it.
Yeah. I'd read recently that the seismic are now discovering there are a lot more earthquakes. Did you read that? A lot more earthquakes going on the moon.
Yes.
A lot.
Yeah. And I do know that some of the mainstream scientists were shocked by that because, they've been assuming the moon is billions of years old.
Right.
And so it takes heat to drive that activity. And so they were shocked that it was still cooling off.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were really shocked by that. Yeah.
So it's not still.
Well, we had,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was dogma for the longest. In fact, some academic websites I've seen still say, it's been geologically dead for 3 billion years, but it's not. And it might actually still be active today. I mean,
it sounds like it is.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that part of it.
I'm making a point of, I forgot exactly what it was, but something to do with the experiments that we took and the moonquakes. The seismic. They knew the moon was moving because you measured it on the first surveyor, and so that we had a series of science experiments but the geology ages were all evolutionary,
right.
And so we stumped them. I picked up a rock that was about the size of my hand, maybe 6-7 inches. On this end, it dated 3.9 billion. On that end, it dated 1.6 billion.
That's a little weird.
Billion.
It's a little weird. So they selected that end because that agreed with their theories.
Right, sure.
And now I don't believe that anymore. Of course, as a creationist, you read the scriptures, and there's no question that God created the heavens and the earth, and he recently, and in geologic time anyway, 6,000-7,000 years ago, and there's keys in the scriptures throughout the scriptures about that, and so the geologists, the old age people, I think their assumptions are wrong about how it all started, and so they lose that. So and I started when I became a believer, I started reading your Acts and Facts.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've been a subscriber ever since. And
That's amazing.
And so you really what you've taught me and what's real and true is just being reinforced by you guys. So thank you so much.
Well, thank
pleasure.
you.
Yeah.
So at the moon, astrophysically speaking, I don't know if you extrapolate back far enough, though. Like if you're talking about millions of years, is that even possible? Like where would the moon be? Like what condition would it be in? And
Yeah,
I know that's speculation.
You're talking
but-
about the recession argument about. Yeah, I personally am a little uneasy with that argument because basically the moon's receding away from the Earth. Okay, it's about 3.8 centimeters per year, and we know that because of the reflectors you guys left on the moon.
Yeah.
We can measure that distance, and so if you assume that the energy dissipation rate has always been the same, you can run the numbers backwards, and you got the moon touching the Earth 1.5 billion years ago. The thing that I kind of worry about is that the evolutionists can plausibly argue those numbers may have changed. So I don't know if it's a slam dunk argument for a young moon, but if you're an evolutionist and you believe in the billions of years, there's a real possibility that the moon should no longer exist. Because if it gets too close to the Earth, it gets ripped apart by tidal forces, So it's like, I don't know if we can say with absolute certainty, but they can't, they don't know the other way either. So, so I'm a little bit cautious about that argument, but it's still very much a potential problem if you believe in billions of years.
It sounds like the seismic, what we're observing now, is a bit
They were shocked.
stronger.
They
than
were
evidence.
shocked. I mean, it was gospel for the longest that the moon was geologically dead for the last 3 billion years. And
Well, our seismic experiments didn't say that.
Yeah. Well, for some
Just
reason,
even
maybe
more
they
so
forgot or something. But I know that one of the reasons is because they were looking at seismic data from Apollo, and that's when they started to realize, wait a second, this is recent, and it's
And how many times it's going on?
yeah.
Okay, well, because again, I'm not going to do this in my lifetime, maybe in glory. No, I don't know. No, it's going to be recreated, so no. What was it like to walk on the moon, like compared to what it's like here on Earth?
Well, there's no comparison. You're 1/6 gravity, and you're in a spacesuit. So I weighed 60 pounds up there, and so you if you're level, you can start really move fast. You can start bouncing, and your steps get bigger and bigger. I call it the big Frankenstein walk, because your suit's stiff. If you're going up a hill, I found it better just to hop, and going down the hill, it was a skip. And but everybody had their own techniques. John was different. He could jump up in the air. If he dropped a tool on the ground, he could jump up in the air and do a split. And the energy would take him down, and he could grab the hammer and jump back. I tried that, and I could never do it. I'd always miss it. And so I fell down one time, and I did a series of push-ups, push on my feet, push, another push, up. It took me about 3 push-ups to get up. But it was just, it was, I wouldn't say exhausting, but it was, you got back inside and you were tired of squeezing your glove, because the gloves were like this, and you had to squeeze to grab something. And so it was it was a workout, 8 hours in that spacesuit. And then we had inside, we had a liquid cool garment that kept us cool. And because the problem in a spacesuit's body heat, it doesn't escape.
Yeah.
So we had this liquid cool garment that picked up the body heat, took it to the backpack, and then through a sublimator, and off it went. We had a hot water bottle that was filled with water, and it came up inside, and we could drink, and we finished that gallon of water. And on this side, there was inside your helmet, there was a real high energy candy bar that was about this long and about that wide. And you could take a bite and pull it up, and you left enough out to get the next bite. Yeah. and we devoured that, and so so we had energy out on the surface, but you ended up when you got back inside, you were just tired of gripping. You had achiness, and some people got blue fingertips because they were reaching into their gloves, and but I mean, you all over. I mean, we're on the moon, so it all just rolls into one. Really,
Yes,
it was
right.
just you never lost your enthusiasm, never lost your excitement, and
That's
wanted
one
to
of
go.
the things they're working on with the new suits.
Yeah. So I'm helping out a little bit on Artemis, and that's going to be a major change, change. We landed on the South Pole, which is very rough and steep angles, and the sun never gets about 2 degrees above the horizon. So where we landed, we had shadows, but you could go into the shadow, and there was enough reflected light into the shadow so you could see the details of the rocks. But down there, unless they have some powerful lights on their rover or on their suits, they're going to have trouble seeing into the shadows, I think. So anyway, I'm trying to help out a little bit with that, and and so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, before we head back to Earth, and also talk about how your faith journey and how that impacted, maybe more in hindsight, but I did have a random question about possibly a lost wedding ring.
Oh,
in space?
Yeah. Well,
What
it
happened?
was Mattingly. We didn't have any shower facilities or anything, but when you wanted to, you could take off all your constant wear garment stuff and then wet down a towel with hot water, and you could rub off and stuff like that. So he'd taken his ring and watch off and put it in a little packet on the side of the spacecraft, but it floated off somewhere, and so we. He looked for it, and 7 days later, we were on our way back from 7 days later, maybe 8 days later, we're on our way back, and we have a spacewalk, and he's doing a spacewalk, and I'm inside looking out, and he's out there about 3 meters away and working on this experiment, and I noticed this little glint, and there's this. I look over and there's this wedding ring floating
Wow.
out,
Oh, man.
floating out the door, and so it hit him on the back of the head, and when it did, instead of bouncing off into space, it took a 180-degree bounce and came right back through the hatch, and I grabbed it and
Wow.
gave it to him when he got back.
That was very nice of you. What a friendly gesture. Okay, so you get back to Earth. You've been on Earth. You're waiting for your husband to come
Right.
home. This was 1972? Was
Yes.
that Apollo 16? So how many years later then was it? We've already talked about, when you both came to Christ, but how many years later was it after the
It was
mission?
3 years later.
years?
For Dottie, 3.
I guess he put months in it.
And I noticed a change. I went to work on space station, not space station, but space shuttle. And it wasn't Apollo was so dynamic, just the space shuttle was meeting. It's out there, 10 years. And I got bored with it. So I began to think about leaving. NASA offered me a job in Washington as a deputy administrator for something or other. And I turned it down because our marriage was in trouble. If we moved to Washington, it's going to get worse. So I said no. I stayed in the astronaut office and worked on operations for Space Shuttle. And then I got I think most of the moonwalkers at our age were either in mid to late 30s, maybe 40s, early 40s. And I was 36, by 4 months the youngest guy. And there I am now. Apollo's over. I'm bored with shuttle. I climbed the ladder of success. Now what am I going
What
to
do you do after the moon?
So everybody the moonwalkers began to get that, wonder, And so, as I said, I tried to work for Space Shuttle for 3 years until the summer of 75, and then I decided, maybe it's money. And I could finish my Air Force career as a reservist and go into business and make millions of dollars, and that might satisfy me. So that was in 76.
Nice.
75, I decided that's when Dottie got saved. And so we began to, our marriage began to improve, but not on my part, but just she accepted me. And so I was going to be a beer distributor in San Antonio. And which I became. And in the spring of 76, we opened up, and we'd left NASA a couple of months before, and she'd gotten saved in October of that year, the last year, 75. And so we joined a church in New Braunfels, and I commuted back and forth and made a lot of money, but I was bored, and so I decided to sell out. And Dottie she saw my frustrations, and my twin brother was a committed Christian. He didn't think an astronaut should be in a beer business. So I don't know what he was praying, but I mean, I got, Dottie said, well, why don't you pray about being in the beer business? And then I was a prayer book prayer, and there's nothing in the prayer book says, you want Charlie in the beer business.
Right, yeah.
So I said, well, you pray, darling. So she started praying. She said, Lord, if you want Charlie in the beer business, give him peace. If you don't want him in the beer business, make it so miserable that he sells out. After that prayer, things got worse and worse and worse, but the money was getting better and better and better. So now I got a choice. Do I chase the peace or do I chase the money? So we decided to sell out, and sold out in March of 1976, and is that right?
No.
78. Yeah, 78. March of 1978. And the next month, a friend of mine invited me to Bible study a weekend Bible study we were at St. John's Episcopal at the time, and said, it's walk through the Bible, and let's go. It's all weekend, and I hesitated studying the Bible all weekend, boring. I thought, so anyway, I went, and it was amazing. It was the story of Jesus from Genesis to Revelations. And we get over into the New Testament, and from my Sunday school Baptist stuff, John 3:16 comes up, and we read that. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. If you believe in him, you'll not perish, but have everlasting life. And the thought occurred to me, that's either the truth or the biggest lie ever perpetrated on humanity. And I get to decide whether it's true or not. And John 14 about Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to God except through me. He either lied or he told the truth. And you get to decide. And so that and many other scriptures convicted me that it's all the truth. And so as the Bible study broke up and we were in our car and getting ready to go home, I looked over at Donnie. I said, darling, no doubt in my heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And I said, Lord, come into my life. And at that instant, the peace of God hit me full force. And I knew that I knew that I knew that I'd made the right decision. And we'd sold our business, and so I just started reading the Bible. And the more I read, the more convicted I became. To me, I didn't come to the Lord as a feeling as a sinner. I'd never raped anybody. I'd never murdered anybody. I'd never stole much, and, just like everybody else. And but God began to convict me on my marriage through Ephesians, husbands, love your wives. Christ loved the church, on Proverbs about how I was an autocratic dad against my kids, demanded perfection, And the Bible says you have the power of life and death in your tongue. And God spoke to my heart and says, you have cursed your own children by telling them they're stupid. And stop it. And so I tears and went to the boys and I told them, sorry, boys, and forgive me, and I want to love you and support you. And we began to grow as a family. Dottie forgave me. She'd already forgiven me, but when I went to her in tears confessing, and so that was the beginning of our change, both of us now working to put Jesus first in our lives. And then money was another problem, and what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? And so I stopped. The Lord says, and over in Malachi it says, you're cheating me. How are we cheating you, Lord? By tithes and offerings. And, we gave a little bit to the church, but not a tithe. And so the Lord said, tithe. I asked Dottie, I said, why don't you pray and see what the Lord's telling you about giving? And so about 2 weeks later, she came back and said, the Lord spoke to me and said, what did he say? Tithe. So we began to tithe, and God has blessed us financially, and you cannot outgive God. And so we've just been blessed and support a lot of ministries, and through our ministry. We formed a ministry, but it's not a ministry that's we did the book is in the ministry, and I've got some videos there and stuff like that. But and when we go speak, we don't ask for any money. God said, don't ask for anything. Yeah. And so if they're generous, they'll give us a life. They don't. It doesn't matter. So we just put it into the ministry, and when we go to third world countries like India, they don't have any money, so we pay our way and support ministries through our ministry. Love for the Least over in Africa and in the Middle East, not the Middle East, but in Syria. They're out there in Erbil area with the refugees and so anyway, we've continued that over the last since 1978, and God has continues to give us opportunities to speak, and we pray about every invitation, and sometimes we don't feel like we're supposed to do it. This invitation came, and we feel like to go to the clips and then to do this interview. And so I love you guys. ICR has been a very big part of my growth, and especially on the creation side. You no question about it, and that God is the author, the creator. And my son's going on the youngest boy with his 2 kids, and my grandson on my other son, they're going to take the float trip down with y'all guys.
Yeah.
And in July, he asked me to go, and I said, man, I'm 88 years old. I'm not sure. I prayed about it, and I felt like, I shouldn't really go. I don't think so.
We have both wanted
the
to
rim
do that,
is good enough for me. Just go around walk around the rim a little.
Yeah.
That's great.
So you haven't done the float then?
No, not me.
Yeah.
That's great.
But it sounds exciting. I wish we'd done it years ago.
Yeah. We wanted to. We took them on our way to California from MIT. We stopped we spent the night on the north rim of the Grand Canyon and took the mules down.
Did you really?
And made it about 2/3 of the way, then they turned around and come back. But that was really fascinating.
Yeah.
We've had some wonderful ministry trips and seen a lot of the world, and just praise
Met
God.
believers.
Walking on the moon, I'm convinced God had me walk on the moon because he knew what he wanted me to do. And as I said earlier, everybody, no matter what your position in life, wants to meet somebody that walked on the moon. And so Jim Irwin and I were, he was a believer when he went, and he started High Flight, and we worked together, but we were never with High Flight. And then he passed on, and so Dottie and I, now they're shuttle astronauts and space station astronauts. You see the belief in the astronaut office now is open, but there were other. I think Apollo 8, the crew there on Christmas Eve when they had the TV show and they read from Genesis.
Right.
Except, in my opinion, except for Neil Armstrong's words, that was the most powerful words spoken from the moon. And now that I'm a believer, man, it's so true.
Yeah.
So the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of His hands. And I see that now in every part of creation. And so it's been a wonderful walk, and I tell everybody walking on the moon was fantastic, but it only lasted 3 days. And the walk with Jesus is even better, and it lasts forever.
Amen.
That's powerful. Yes. So people can learn more about you and your story through your book, Moonwalker, through your website, right as well, Duke Ministry.
We have two websites. We have charlieduke.com, which is more the Gee Whiz Moon side, and then the Duke Ministries for Christ.
That's wonderful. Great. Well, so we'll include the link to your websites for people to find there. Do you have any words of wisdom for believers who are looking to become an astronaut? Advice that might be practical or spiritual?
Practical, if you're studying and you're in college or in graduate school or whatever, don't change your career. If you like physics and you love physics, you're happy at physics, stay with physics, and hopefully they'll pick you as a physicist.
Right.
But don't try to change your career and become a mechanical engineer because you think they're going to pick mechanical engineers. And you do that, and you might get picked for the space program, but the next day they cancel it. So you're in trouble.
Good point. Yeah.
So pick a career that you love to work with. If you've never even come close to a spacecraft, you got a career that's stimulating and satisfying. And I think that if you do get selected, you'll see that you can't help but see that the heavens declare the glory of God. Yeah.
Well, can I end on maybe a spicy question? How do we combat from any side, even within the Christian community, conspiracies like flat Earth, NASA using computer-generated imagery, or the moon landing was faked? We have it right here. What do we say?
Well, I say, why don't you believe it? And the moon hoax people say, well, the flag's waving, and there's no stars in the sky. And those kind of crazy things. I said, well, there are no stars in the sky because the sun's shining.
Yeah.
All the time you're on the moon, the sun's shining, and the sky's black because there's no atmosphere, even though the sun's shining. And so that's right. I destroy your hoax theory right there. And then, well, the flag's flying. It's not. It's got a curtain rod holding it out, and it's stationary, and it's got wrinkles in it because it'd been vacuum packed for 6 months, and I couldn't pull the wrinkles out of it. Yeah. But if you look at a picture I took when I put it up and right before we left, same wrinkles, and it's in the same position. So those kind of weak arguments that it's all hoaxed, and one that really destroys them is, if we faked it, why did we fake it 6 times?
Yeah.
If you're going to fake something, do it once and shut up. But 400,000 people working on Apollo, and not one of them has said it's faked. The Russians never said it was fake.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And in
They
fact,
really
they
were fine.
They would want to.
Wanted
They
to.
thought they could.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
had done
instead
it.
they congratulated the U.S.
Yeah.
except they could say they knew we did it, and they congratulated us. The radar reflectors, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that is orbiting the moon, taking pictures. It's got camera resolution. You can see our spacecraft, the descent stage. You can see the car. You can see not the individual footprints, but you can see where we walk because the surface gets dark when you walk on it. And then you can see the experiments package. Every Apollo landing site. And so it's weak argument.
Yeah.
The flat Earth people, I said, how do you know it's flat? Well, it's flat. Well, have you walked to the edge and looked over? No, he never did. I said, well, has anybody ever done that? No, I don't know anybody. So the arguments I use is simple. Well, if it's flat, if you're standing on the flat side looking out and you see the North Star out there, if the Earth's flat, you could walk all the way to the edge of the Earth and the North Star would still be out there. But if it's a circle, a sphere, as you walk towards the North Star, the star is going to go straight up over you until you get to the North Pole, and it's there.
Yeah.
So, and then the ship going across the horizon. There are a lot of examples you can use to prove. And I said, why don't you just look up in the sky? What does it look like? What
Most of them
does the
just-
moon look like?
Yeah, right.
They don't want to believe.
Yes.
They don't
just
want
don't
to.
want to. They
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah.
I told, I think we mentioned it earlier on this program, but one of the NBC girls, when this hoax stuff was getting started, I said to her, why did we fake it 9 times? Going to the moon 9 times, landed 6 times. If you fake it, do it once and shut up. So I
You don't hear it much anymore.
don't hear it much anymore.
Well, we
You do?
we do, yeah.
Oh, you still do,
hear
really?
from people, and it's weird. It's for some reason, I don't know what the deal is.
Well, any closing remarks or final thoughts for our viewers and listeners from either of you or even you, Dr. Hebert?
Well, let me just say, as I said earlier, the walk on the moon, it was exciting. I'm glad I did it, but God used it when I became a believer and put Jesus first in my life, and it healed our marriage, and we've seen such a dramatic change, and God opens the doors to share the love of Jesus. For God so loved the world, he loves everybody. And so the opportunities that God gives us to share the love of God, we want to take advantage of everything. So if you're watching this podcast and you're not a believer, then open your heart and just challenge God, and he'll show up and give you a blessing that you never thought possible.
That's great. And for believers, there's so many takeaways, I feel like. Just one, I think you already were alluding to this too, both of you. On the pew that you're sitting in church, don't assume the person sitting next to you is a believer too, just because someone's been raised in the church, even by a loving Christian family. That don't assume that. Any of the other programs we've had, Josh Timonen used to work for Richard Dawkins, grew up in the church, and then kind of left the faith. So just an example to always be a faithful witness and a light, and you both surely are. You can see it in your face, the joy of the Lord exuding from you. And prayer works, right? And clearly, and that we can communicate with the Lord at any time, and he's faithful to hear us and answer our prayers.
Well, we're just delighted to have you. Thanks
Thank
so much
you
for
so
coming.
much.
It's a real pleasure and honor.
Yes,
Well, thank you for your good work.
Well, thank you.
always love to read
you
stuff
really
about
helped me and
the flood.
Well, man, I hope
debating.
after this we'll get a chance to share. I don't know how much time we're going to have, but we got some stuff to share with you if we
Yes.
if we can.
Well, thank you.
Well, I look forward to
it's
receiving it.
Yes, our pleasure. Well, very good. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Creation.Live. I hope this was an encouraging episode for you. It certainly was for me. What a powerful testimony from the Dukes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with your family and friends. If you want to get Creation.Live, this program, 2 weeks early, you can become a member here on YouTube or a patron on Patreon. We'll include links in the description below. And our other podcast, the Creation Podcast, you can get that 1 week early by becoming a member as well. And we have many perks available, so take advantage of them there. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time on Creation.Live.
We want to say a huge thank you to our members and patrons. If you'd like to see your name here and unlock perks like early access to our podcasts, members-only polls and live streams, behind-the-scenes footage, or exclusive video content, links are in the description below.